What's going on, everybody? As you can tell by the thumbnail, today we are going to be doing some surgery on the Miata, specifically on the front end. Now, we're not going to be doing anything super crazy like a tube front or anything like that. We just need to fix some things that are not quite fitting right in the front end. You may be wondering, what do I mean by that? Last year, when I put in the Miata aluminum radiator in the front up here, it replaced the OEM or factory plastic top radiator that was only about an inch or an inch and a quarter thick. The Miata aluminum radiator is like 2 or 2 1/4 inches thick, plus the E-fans that are behind it. Now that creates a couple of tight spots, one being around the intake of the intake manifold. It's very tight there. You have to have a very tight radius bend or 90 degree going straight down to be able to get your intercooler piping in the right position. Also, the radiator hose on the top of the radiator that goes to the back of the engine for the coolant reroute system, that's very tight, right smashing into that intake tube. So that's issue number one. It's very tight in that spot on that one corner. We need to address that and get that taken care of. Issue number two, the sway bar is not currently in the car. Now, because that radiator is an inch or an inch and a quarter farther into the engine bay, that basically took up the room where the original sway bar was sitting. So we had to take it out and we had to make adjustments to the front suspension to run no sway bar. Now, not having a front sway bar changes the front suspension drastically. It also changes the rear suspension and how it reacts to steering inputs. Now, the third issue, because the sway bar is out, I had to make some pretty extreme changes to the coilovers in the front to kind of help compensate not having that stiffness and balance side to side on the car. I have almost an inch of preload on the coilovers. That is a lot. They are tight. We need to get that back down to an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/4 of an inch of preload so it's much softer and reacts better to steering inputs. It's not so jabby with the steering wheel, and then the sway bar, getting that back in is going to help stabilize the front end a lot. So just so you guys can see what I'm talking about, that radiator hose is actually touching the intake tube right there, because this comes basically straight off in line with your intake manifold. I don't know why that is. That doesn't make sense. Even if I would have had an OEM intake, the plastic one that comes across right here, and the original radiator hose that S's into the front of the block right there, everything would still be way too tight anyways. This is in a different location than the plastic top. The plastic top is actually way over on this end. I believe it's been a while since I've looked at one, but that makes a huge difference in where you can put things in this area. Now, what we're actually going to be cutting in the front end of the Miata is the core support right up on the top. That is basically the main interference for the radiator to be able to move it forward away from the engine and to be able to make some more room for the intake, radiator hose, and the sway bar underneath. What we're going to do is take this 1.5 inch core support up here and basically cut it down to where there's only a 1/4 inch strip, and then use some 11 gauge steel to plate the back side of it to make it rigid so the hood latch still works, and then these hood little supports are still in place, basically creating enough room to where we can put that sway bar down on the bottom and hopefully free up all kinds of room in the engine bay. Now, there's a few things we need to do before we can start cutting anything. We need to drain the radiator, pull the radiator and the fans completely out of the car and get as much room around where we're cutting as possible. We also need to remove the intercooler and all the piping on both sides to make sure that's all out of the way. We also have to seal up the turbo so no sparks or debris gets into the turbo. We want to protect that and keep that clean. And then we're going to cover the engine with a fire blanket to make sure that nothing on top gets any sparks or burns or anything on it. You do still have a fuel system up here, so we're going to probably disconnect the battery and make sure that's all taken care of. We don't want any type of fire in the engine bay. We do have a fire extinguisher and this fire blanket in case something does spark up. So we'll start getting to the work, get this radiator drained out. The radiator does have antifreeze in it, and it's fresh antifreeze for the winter. So we're gonna drain that into a fresh pan so it's nice and clean so we can use that again. We don't wanna use our dirty oil pan. If we did that, it would be contaminated, and we don't want to put oil into our coolant system. That's not really good or necessary. So we'll start getting this thing drained out and get all this stuff out of the way so we can start our little bit of surgery on the front end of the Miata. Now to make things a little bit easier on the front end, we're going to remove the bumper completely off. Just get that out of the way. It's going to allow better access to the intercooler bolts on the front mounts here, and then also the intercooler piping. Now that the bumper is taken off the car, we're gonna step in a little closer, get the intake off the turbo, get that set off to the side, make some room over there so we can access the bolts for the radiator fans back here, and then we'll get this top radiator hose out of the way. Once that's out of the way, we'll get to taking off the intercooler piping, the charge piping. So all of the elbows and everything down on both sides, we'll take all of that out, get that out of the way, and then tackle the brackets that are on the front of the intercooler here. Well, all right, we got the front end basically to the point where we just have to start cutting things. Before we cut anything though, we do need to take a few measurements of where some of these mounting points for the radiator are actually on the chassis. There's some brackets down here that actually bolt in, but it's all linked to the mounting points of the sway bar, so we can't just unbolt it and take it out and then cut things off of it. We need to leave those brackets in position, which I might be able to refab up something a little different underneath on the frame rail to hold the sway bar with those brackets, so that maybe I can pull those two pieces apart or separate that one bracket into two, and then be able to move and utilize the bracket for the radiator and just re-drill and tap new holes rather than fabricating a completely different part. So we're gonna look at some of this stuff, measure it out a little bit. I'll show you what we're doing on the way, and then yeah, we'll get to trimming this out, try and get it mocked up, and see what we can do for getting this radiator moved forward. So what I'm going to measure first is from the back side to where the front, or like the bolts are sticking past the front side of this cross member here. We don't want to cut into these mounting bolts for the hood latch at all. We want to make sure those clear where we're going to plate behind that. So we're going to kind of measure off the back side. I think they're only about a quarter of an inch long. So as long as we're about 1/4 of an inch back from the front side of this cross member, we should be good to just cut it clean off right there. If we need to, we can come back and kind of fine tune that a little bit. So what we're gonna do is take just a base measurement. It is 1 3/4 on the top side. So we're gonna actually maybe take that down to 1 3/8. We're not gonna go just 1/4 inch. We're gonna leave a little extra material. So we're gonna take a mark on both ends and in the middle, and then take our square and get a straight line drawn all the way across here. All right, so I got this all marked out. I went over it with my yellow marker because that blue one just wasn't really marking very well. Now we got a nice solid yellow, kind of solid. Going over the blue, it kind of turned it into a weird green, but now there's a line all the way across. Now we can get out some cutting tools, the grinder or a saw blade, and we'll start cutting a little bit and see what we can get ourselves into here. Hopefully we can get a nice clean cut across here to where we have plenty of room. Then we can start looking at where the brackets will have to be moved to and get those cut off too. Now this fire blanket, I just picked it up off of Amazon. Something really cheap, something real easy and quick to get to the house. We're just gonna lay this over basically the front side of the engine to kind of block off the front of the engine. So no sparks or anything is gonna get on top of where the fuel injectors are, the fuel rail, any of that stuff. It's all gonna be protected along with the turbo side over here. It's all gonna be protected and covered. We're not gonna have any sparks that are gonna get onto the actual engine. Yes, we'll probably have some sparks getting onto the fire blanket, but that's gonna basically shut anything down, any type of heat, and keep it from penetrating and getting onto anything that could be on the engine or the block so that we don't have a potential fire. It's also always a good idea to have a fire extinguisher handy in your garage. I just pulled the one out of the car. This is the one I take to the track. I also have a full-sized one, I believe right over there, just in case. This is only a 2 or 3 pound. I have a 5 pound close by as well. And just like that, the back side of that cross member is cut out of the way. Now we can start measuring out where these tabs need to move for the radiator. We got to move them forward a little bit. Basically 1 3/8, same as this. We're going to move them forward, and that should be plenty good. Now when we look in here at these brackets, this is for the top of the radiator mount. This is the top bracket for the intercooler, and then this is the bottom mount for the intercooler. I just utilized some existing bolt holes that were already here. I don't remember what exactly was in these 2 brackets when I first got the car. And then this is where the rubber bushing piece on the bottom of the radiator gets mounted. It just drops in there. So that has to get moved forward. I believe what I'm gonna end up doing is just cutting this straight off right here. And then I can take some 11 gauge plate, weld it to this to push it out, and then re-weld that to it. Basically recreate the 90 farther forward, and then same with these. However, I'm going to take out this bolt for this bracket and then cut this about basically in line with the cross member up here, and then I can just weld this one directly onto the frame rail. This one, however, I will need to adjust, probably using just a little tab of 11 gauge to push that forward as well. The rest of this is gonna basically stay where it is because the sway bar mount goes right here. So that needs to stay there. We need that as structural as possible. That ties in both sides of your suspension. So that's kind of what we're looking at, moving those tabs. And then same thing over here, it's moving these 2 tabs forward. Again, this is the upper intercooler mount, lower, and then the top radiator mount. So yeah, cut that clean off, move those forward. I'll kind of get that all mocked up and probably just draw it on the whiteboard. We're probably not going to weld those in today. We're just going to make sure everything is cleaned, prepped, and ready to go. Trying to show you guys what I'm doing here. So I did find out this bracket that holds the lower mounts can come on. I thought it was one whole piece for the sway bar mount, but it is not. It is a separate piece, so that's perfect. We might actually be able to reutilize this whole piece all as one piece and not have to cut anything. I'll just end up drilling and tapping into the frame rail so that we can just slide this whole thing forward that 1 3/8. Maybe. I think it should work because we're gonna move this bracket in anyways. So if we can move that and get that remounted at that same height, that'd be perfect. We might actually have to move it and shimmy it down just a little bit, just depending on where the hood shuts down. We don't want to interfere and hit the top of the radiator when the hood comes down. So we'll kind of get to that. I tried to kind of drill out the spot welds, but I almost feel like there's a couple more in here, which I don't know why you'd spot weld something that's bolted. It doesn't make sense. Maybe see if I can get a chisel and a hammer on that real quick. Yeah, that's spot welded out there. Why would you spot weld and bolt it? Now that we have the back piece cut off, we have all the brackets broke free and out of there, we're gonna do a little bit of grinding, clean this up a little bit so we can prep for weld. Then we can kind of mark out where those tabs need to be repositioned so that we can get that done in the next video. Now that this is all broke free and loose, all the brackets are off, this is pretty floppy and weak. That's why we're gonna get a plate welded onto the back here, and then we're gonna also put something back here to brace it on the outside so that it's kind of squared and boxed off so that the radiator can come nice and close, but it's also squared off here so it's nice and rigid still, because the hood has to be held by this little piece that's all bendy right now. And that's not gonna hold up super great, especially when you're going like down the road or something real fast. The hood can pull up on this and twist, and we don't want the hood to come up and smash the windshield. And there we go. That whole side of the frame rail is basically cleaned enough to where we're gonna be mounting and welding stuff to. I might end up just putting like a little bit of an L bracket plate in here when we get to that point to be able to mount the tabs up. And then for here, this is cleaned up pretty well to where we'll just do some stitch welds across the top here with a plate. I did actually like go a little past where the bolts go through. That's not that big of a deal. I'm gonna kind of build something right up to about here and then box it out a little bit. That should be plenty good and support it as long as it doesn't interfere with where we want to put the radiator up here. And then over here we got that ground off as well for some plates and those tabs to go back on. Then we also have it ground off on this side so that we can get tabs where they need to go, get that all welded and built out. So I just unbolted these pieces that were on the front. They used to hold like the piece of foam that goes behind the bumper. That's long gone in the garbage a year ago. They just basically bolted on like that. We don't need them on there. Both of them is maybe 2-3 pounds. Plus, I cut off some extra bracket stuff that was just hanging off the one side over here. We don't need any of that. It's nice and wide open here, and the bumper kind of just floats back here and ties into the fender. So we don't need all that excess stuff. This is plenty strong without this. We're gonna take a real quick break to thank all of you guys, the viewers, for subscribing and clicking on my channel, watching my videos. I greatly appreciate it. It's helping me get to 1,000 subscribers. We're real close. We should be able to hit that goal of 1,000 this year. Let me know in the comments down below, what should I do to celebrate 1,000 subscribers when we do hit that achievement? We're gonna end out today's video by slapping the front sway bar back in the car. I'm dying to get this thing back in here. I wanted it in the car so bad last year and I just didn't have the time to be able to do this type of a project. Now that we're doing it, we're able to get this thing back in the car. So let's get it in there. So this thing has kind of been banged around a little bit, but I think these mounts are basically in the position where they were. So this should go right back into position where it needs to go. It's gonna be kind of awkward because the little arms and stuff are all hanging down. Whoa! Let's not drop it on my face, right? Couple bolts in. Now I can switch over to the other side. Now this sway bar is not like super giant or anything. This is just a factory OEM sway bar that came in the car. It's all it really needs up front. Could I go bigger? Yes. Do I need to? Not really. Not for what I'm doing with the car. If I was doing like autocross or road racing where you really need the car to be planted all the time in the front, especially steering around corners, yeah, you'd probably want a bigger bar, but like this one's fine for drifting. It does the job and it's gonna be a lot better than not having one at all. So, yeah. I don't remember it being this tight to the radiator hose down here, but I guess it is. I'll need an extension to get to this one. Before we tighten it down too much though, we do need to get the end links up into position. I think I have this bolt in here backwards as well. Oh, and because I have the suspension fully drooped right now, probably won't be able to get this bolt in here. No, I'll get it. There we go. It's almost there. One more bolt on the other side and it's technically in, just not tight. That one went right in. It's like it wanted to be there. There we go. It's technically in. Well, the sway bar is officially back into the car. That is going to be a huge game changer for this season. Just tightening everything up, just with my little ratchet that only goes to 35 foot-pounds, but just tightening up those bolts, it moved the tires out or towed it out a little bit on both sides, just by tightening everything up, and it tied everything back together, it pushed everything out. So that's gonna mean we're gonna be able to dial in the alignment even better than I had it before. We will need to get this onto an alignment rack this year. It's been 2 years since I actually been on a rack. I've just been doing the alignments at home with squares and string and measuring tape. We're gonna continue this build portion in the next episode where we start putting some of those pieces in. We're gonna fabricate some new pieces and get that all situated to where the radiator is as far forward as we can get it. Then we're gonna get to mounting the intercooler in front of that again. We do need to get some like foam weather stripping to seal off the backside of the intercooler to the radiator so that we're getting as much pull through the intercooler and the radiator as we can to just help optimize the cooling abilities of the vehicle. That being said, that's going to end out today's episode. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.